Hello.
Hello.
I'm Kay.
Hi, Kay. Hi. How are you doing?
It's good to see you. Good. Doing very well. I didn't hear my phone ring. Sorry I missed you.
Okay. No problem. Well,
So how can I help?
yes. Well, I've got a couple of questions. As you know,
Okay.
I'm doing a research. And,
Yes.
Flores helped me finding a lot of people who are willing to participate in an interview.
That is very good.
Yeah.
So they all have to be American Republicans?
Yes. Yeah. My thesis is on skepticism among Republicans towards the news media.
Yes.
So yeah.
So this is a question you were posing. This is not something you were given as an assignment.
No. It's something I came up with, indeed.
Okay.
And it's because I'm interested in politics and also in American politics.
Okay.
I was also wondering, why do Republicans tend to be more skeptical towards the news media than Democrats? Because I read that in another paper, in a research, and I thought,
yes,
that's a good one for my thesis. A good question.
Yes, yes, except that I think your premise is wrong. It should be, what did American media do to lose the full faith of the American people in their reporting? Because, they're pushing an agenda as opposed to reporting facts and letting people make their own decisions. So it's always, the major news medias always have an agenda, and they try to tell you what to see and not just give you facts and say, this is what's happening, and let you form your own opinion whether it's a good thing or a bad thing.
That could also have been my question, but it's good that you're telling me this.
Yes. So your question, what did the media do?
Yeah, well,
just be skeptical.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, because I understood that. Yeah, you're skeptical, right? And can you tell me, what did they do? Indeed, why is it?
It is because they spin the news to a certain slant. They don't report absolute facts and let you make your own decision. They report in a way that they want you to see things. Do you see my point?
In a way, you want to see things.
Yes, they don't give me the facts and let me decide whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, or let me make my own decision. They give me the facts they want me to have. Also, the media, if you look up, there have been so very many reports where they make first page headline news that something happened, and then a few weeks later it's disproven. It really wasn't true what they reported, and then they'll put on the 4th or the 5th page or the 8th page or a retraction, but don't give it the same publicity and information that they did when they reported something that was false.
Yeah, why do you think they do that?
They do that because they don't want you to know the truth. They get called on a lie or a misrepresentation, and so then they have to make a retraction, and yet they don't want it to get the same attention that the false story got.
All right. And are there specific platforms or channels or websites that are worst with doing these kind of things?
Yes, I would say that our American channel, MSNBC, is a very, very left-leaning false reporting station. CNN is probably the worst. NBC, or some of the worst. The print, it would be the New York Times and the Washington Post. But then, there's several right-leaning, stations, too, that also skew things. So you just have to be careful, to try to verify what you're hearing is true. Yeah. And that's the problem, is that everybody has an agenda. And if we could have information that's just given to us, just the facts, just the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I mean, our news was awful reporting that. I mean, they conflated what the Palestinians did with what the Israelis did, instead of us just getting the facts and then letting us decide, was one wrong and one, right, or whether they were equally wrong. Let us make that decision and don't decide for us.
Yeah, and why do you think they do it in this specific example, like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Mm-hmm. Why do they do it?
Yeah, because they give some facts, but not all of the facts, if I understand it correctly.
Yes. They do it because they have their own agenda. They want people to see things the way they see them. And that's, it's just a lot of it, I don't know. It's just, there's big money behind media that's pushing an agenda.
All right. And what kind of an agenda is that, in your opinion?
That is, there's a big money group that would like to see America move to be more socialist, would like us to be not the number one country in the world, but to be equal with others. And there's China that is trying so hard to displace America, and is undermining a lot of our politics and our industrial, stealing, information, doing things. So yeah, I'm not a big China fan. I feel like we need to be strong up against China, but anyway, the media is just totally propaganda. I mean, you just wouldn't even believe some of the people that are in our government that are subverting the will of the American people.
And how do you see the connection with the news media?
The news media is the voice of a lot of the Democrat Party.
Yeah.
They have a direct channel to the Democrat Party. A lot of their talking points are things that you hear a Democrat politician say, and then the newspaper's saying the identical thing.
All right. And you've just said that it's difficult to, how did you say that, to see what is true and what's not true.
Right.
That you have to check that out yourself.
Yes.
How do you do that? Because, as you've mentioned, there are also right-leaning biased news media platforms, etc. How do you read the news?
So a lot of what I get, honestly, is filtered, but I do try my best to listen to both points, both points of view the best I can, and read actual documents as opposed to someone just interpreting it for me. But, I think I also hear what I want to hear, and so it's really hard. It's really hard here. Would you say that journalism in Holland, are you in Holland now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel like you're getting straight news?
Well, yeah, I think I do, but I also see differences between different news channels and newspapers, but it's not so obvious, not as, in my opinion, in the United States. It feels like a newspaper or news channel almost has to be left or right-leaning in the United States, while it can be somewhere in between and in the middle over here. That's what I think, but I'm not sure about that. That's what I'm also asking you.
Yes.
But yeah.
Yes. I will say that there, within those different organizations, media organizations, there are some there are some shows where you feel like you're getting good information. Even not so much on CNN, but like on CBS, there's a news program that I take a lot of. It's not straight news. It's more of a investigative reporting. And I feel like those shows often are very honest. And so those are the ones that I like to hear. We do have several good investigative reporters within, like, the Fox News station. Sometimes you can listen to them and you feel like you're getting straight information. But a lot of Fox News is talk show. It's just people's opinion, so you're listening to a people's opinion. But I feel like your news, more than anything, is probably more honest than other media.
Okay. And what is that show called?
Fox News. Oh, the investigative. There's one on CBS that is Cheryl Atkinson. I feel like she's an honest reporter. She's an investigative reporter. And there's a girl, Laura Logan. She's a good investigative reporter. Those shows, when you can get it, those to me are very helpful. I feel like I'm getting straight news.
All right.
But not very much.
Not very much, no.
So you're more interested in politics than journalism. Is that true?
Well, maybe. I'm interested in both, yeah.
Okay. So you're getting your master's or doctorate?
This is my bachelor's.
Okay, bachelor's. Okay.
My bachelor's and it's called Communication Sciences, and it's with a major in journalism.
Okay. Oh, congratulations. That sounds wonderful. Do you have any questions that specifically you need to ask?
Yeah, well, another question, yeah. It's actually, the main question, and I want to know your opinion, why you think that Republicans tend to be more skeptical than Democrats, because, as you've mentioned, there are also, for example, right-leaning media channels, but it seems like the reaction is different among Democrats towards the news media.
Well, I guess the best way to say that would be that the Democrats hear all the time. The media is giving Democrat talking points. So Democrats are hearing what they want to hear, whether it's truth or not. They're hearing what the Democrats are telling the media, and the media is reporting. Whereas Republicans are hearing the Democrat talking points and are wondering, why is the media not reporting the facts? Why are they reporting what the Democrat Party wants to put out there?
Yeah. All right, but it does happen. But would you say that the majority of the news media consists of Democrats?
Yes, the reporters, and they call themselves journalists, but I would say that they're more opinion writers than they are true journalists.
Okay.
And yes, our media is definitely a liberal media, and I don't know if that's true worldwide, but here in the United States, but so are our college professors. It's definitely been a move in order to monopolize by the socialists, by the Democrats. They've over years, a period of at least 50 years, have moved to take over those kinds of positions so that they are influencing more young Americans. So media, education, politics, they work hard to move towards this left-leaning theories. So.
And that happened over the years?
Yes.
It has become worse.
Yes. Oh, yes. But they started, it's like the Zelensky, who is a socialist. There's a group that had worked in the United States to promote his agenda, and so it's been going for years and years, and it's just snowballing. It has been unchecked, and so it's on purpose that it's Democrats and it's socialists that are in our media and our education. It's planned.
And do you remember a specific moment that you realized I can't trust the news media? Or
It's would say that's been within the last 20 years that it's been more obvious. You know how things, slowly boil, like you think you're hearing the truth, like back we had these wonderful news readers, that would be on the evening news. We thought we were hearing all the truth, but now they don't even try to hide their opinions. They are blatantly pushing an agenda where, it's very obvious. So I would say probably the last 6 years it's been just out in the open that they're not trying to hide it.
The last 6 years, okay.
Yeah, very, very much so.
And how do you think the news media performed during Trump's presidency?
I think they performed as like an opposition party to President Trump. I feel like that whatever he did, they tried to find fault with it. I think you would have a hard time reading the news media, like to say, oh my gosh, he started Middle East peace. He has, worked behind the scenes to form peace efforts between the Palestinians and, certain states. Oh, okay. Certain nation states in the Middle East to be, have peace accords with Israel. You don't see how amazing that was. You don't read great stories saying, amazing, working towards world peace. That was a huge, huge world event, and I don't know what kind of play it got over in the Netherlands, but I'm telling you here, it was hard to find, the left-leaning media to give him the praise that it deserved. So that was just a small thing. And then anything he did in politics, he was not praised the way that he should have been. Closing the southern border was an amazing effort. To build the wall was an amazing effort. And it would have allowed us to reform our immigration system so that we could get people to come in legally, apply and go through the process and come in legally like other nations do. But for some reason, the media made that a negative, made that a horrible thing, that we wanted to have a closed border so that we could have legal immigration.
Yeah. Well, the legal immigration thing, that's of course something that the Democrats don't like. But with
they want open borders. Yeah. And so you would say they wanted it far back, as 20 years, but it would never be a spoken thing. And so things have come along so far now, the Democrats speak it out loud that they want an open border, that they want people to come and go however without any credentials. So that's how far we've come in a very short time. And I will say that a lot of it is media driven. It's the media repeating things and making things that are good sound like a bad thing. And the media has gotten really good at it. Demonizing good. It's crazy. It is so crazy.
Do you also think that social media online has a role in this polarizing?
Yeah, social media has a big part of it. I think you're finding more and more people are leaving social and young people are not, but older people are just not paying as much attention to social media anymore. Which hopefully that there'll be some, but that's again polarizing. That's such a great word. It is, because it would be nice if we could all have a conversation together and share our opinions, but if someone speaks up to have a different opinion, they're automatically shot down and demonized. And so you find that conservative voices are being crushed and silenced, while the same points of even if just with the coronavirus, if you refer to it as coming from China, then you're like a horrible person, that, you know, that you are blaming China for letting this virus go, when, you know, it's just a fact. You know, it's just a fact. So it's really hard to have a loud voice here. You know, and I have friends that are left-leaning. We try very hard to have a conversation to help everybody understand our point of views. But in a big social media setting, you can't do that. You're just silenced.
All right. And would you say that in real life it is possible?
Yes, it is possible. Yes.
So it's not impossible. That's good to hear.
It's not impossible, but if you have the right kind of friends.
Yeah.
Yes, because we do have friends, fewer and fewer, unfortunately, that are have different points of political view, because things have gotten so polarized. But there are still people who are willing to have conversation and talk. So that's a good thing.
That's good to hear. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, good. Well, it's wonderful to see you.
Yeah.
I'm going to pass my phone to my husband because he says his is dead. So, are we through? Do you have anything else for me?
No, it's fine. I'm very happy that you wanted to talk with me and ask all the questions that I needed.
Okay, that sounds great. Well, my husband is a lot smarter than I am, so you may enjoy talking to him. Here's David.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, hey, how are you?
David. Hi, I'm fine. How are you?
I'm well.
Good to hear. Well, I've just had a good chat with your wife, and thank you that you want to talk to me too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, as you've heard from Flores, possibly that my thesis is on skepticism towards the news media among Republicans. And I was wondering, or you could tell me why you think that Republicans tend to be more skeptical in these days towards the news media than Democrats in general.
Well, one thing you have to understand, and you're fairly young, but I think one of the things you have to understand is you have to have an appreciation for history. And you know, if you go back many decades ago, we used to have debates. You know, you look at the English Parliament, and they actually have open debates. And we used to have debates about issues. And, you know, and oftentimes one side, and I was a Democrat, one side would have a couple of good points, and another side would have maybe a couple of good points, and then there were points that either side didn't like, but you could intelligently debate those points. And so both sides were open to dialogue. That doesn't exist anymore. So what we have today is you have one party that is spinning whatever their issue is, they're putting a spin to it. So if you, for example, listen to some of the more progressive stations, you will hear repeatedly, they will each anchor or each person that's reporting or giving information will essentially say what five other people have said. So they're repeating the storyline. The bullet line is being repeated over and over and over and over again. So it's just a repetition of the spin. Now, you know, what we used to have is we would debate those issues and we'd talk about, and both sides would listen to each other. But what we don't have today, people are not listening. So if you're on this side, say the progressive side, you have total blinders with regard to what the other side may be saying and what their points might be. And unfortunately, I think what happened to the Democratic Party and the progressive media is once they abandon, and they truly have abandoned labor, and the Democratic Party is from my perspective, the Democratic Party is under the arm of multinationalism. So you say, well, how can the Democrats, who are being very progressive, why are the multi-capitalists on their side? Because what the multi-capitalists want to do is they simply want to make money, and they don't care where the goods are made, whether they're made in China or whether they're made wherever in the world. They want to produce products with a decreased cost of goods, and have a larger profit margin. So, we want to make it for this amount, okay, and we want to sell it for this amount.
Yeah.
But if we make it for this amount, we're still going to have to sell it maybe for this amount. So we would rather make it for this amount and have a larger profit margin. So you have several factors in play here. You have multi-capitalism, and you have, I would say, liberal, progressive type people. But the problem is that many of the people that are on one side, the progressive and liberal side, simply are not even able to articulate the reasons for their position. And the people that are the Republicans seem to, they want to be open to debate. They want to have dialogue. They want to exchange ideas, but they're just being shut down. And so the forces at play that, are suppressing the conservative majority, which actually is the majority. You might not know it from the last election, but the last election was an anomaly because of COVID. There are many that believe Donald Trump would have been elected president again absent COVID. COVID was a factor that, changed the dynamics. So, and that could be debated. But if you look over the last 4 years during the Donald Trump presidency, the news media hammered and hammered and hammered away at a false narrative. So how can you not be, hesitant to buy into anything these people say when you go from one station to the next, to the next, to the next, and you hear the same thing, the same spin, the same bullet line over and over and over and over again because they're pushing a dialogue. And the dialogue is Donald Trump's a bad guy. Anything he is for, we're against. And frankly, whether you like Donald Trump or not, his position was in line with my own on many things. I always believed that we should control our borders. I always believed that we should have a formalized immigration system. Obviously, let people in. Republicans are not opposed to letting people in. They just want to control.
Yeah.
He used the analogy of a door. That can be good or bad, but the idea is to have some controls over who's getting in, and hopefully you get the better group of people as opposed to the worst group of people. So we need controls, and I think the progressives and the liberals in this country do not understand the significance of the national debt. They think they can just continue to print money and spend money, and you can't do that. I, for one, and this sounds crazy, I, for one, think we need a national debt tax. Because if we had a national debt tax, it would make people appreciate the debt. They say, why are we paying a national debt tax? And the explanation's easy, because we spend more than we have and we have debt, and therefore we have to pay it down. Our country is in such financial turmoil right now that if we took 10% of the gross income of every working person in this country, it would not pay the interest on the national debt. That's how big the national debt is. 10% of the gross income of every working American will not pay the interest on the national debt. That's huge. So what can that lead to? And looking down the road, And that's why Republicans are having conversations. Republicans are not against, social benefits. I think and again, you have to understand history. We talk about Social Security and where it came from in America. Well, that was from Franklin Roosevelt. He was a Democratic president. And in my view, one of our great presidents. And, he felt that because of what we had up here, the Great Depression, the stock market just went, down the gutter.
Yeah.
And because of that, he felt there needed to be some kind of assurance so that people wouldn't be destitute. And he came up with Social Security. I think Social Security was a great reform for the country. And, so that's something, you work that in and say, well, we can afford to do that. But we get to a point where I'm trying to buy votes. Why do they want to open the border? They want to open the border because their belief is that of the people coming into the United States, the Democrats are going to get the vast majority of those votes. So let's bring more Hispanics into the country because we'll get 60% or 75%, and the Republicans will get the rest, and that puts us in the dominant political power seat. So you have that's a reason for that. So there's a reason for everything. And you say, well, why do the newspaper people, why are so many of them pushing a false narrative? Well, because they're paid for. They don't make $20,000 a year in American money. They make $1 million a year. And so when somebody comes to you and says, hey, I want you to be on TV and you're going to make $1.5 million a year, but we want you to spin this narrative, you go, give me the narrative. I mean, seriously, that, you're going from somebody who just, you're out of college 4 years, and now you're going to make $1.5 million. They just bought you.
Yeah. Because
how many people are going to say, well, I don't want your $1.5 million. That's against my value system. So money has a lot to do with it. They have paid for the voices that are out there pushing the narrative. And that's another thing we're up against. So the United States is, in my view, right now in a crisis. Donald Trump wanted to keep us out of war. And say what you may about the way he interacted with leaders, but Donald Trump kept us out of war. Democrats typically get us in wars. And right now, with what is going on in the world right now, there's going to be a war. Whether the United States gets in that war or not, that's a whole other issue. But, the world has always been at war. Somebody with one country with another country, and somebody, ends up losing and somebody ends up winning, and there's devastation.
Yeah.
So, we in this country, and I would say at the last election, I think the vast majority of the people voted Republican, but, I only got one vote and others got 5 or 6. So it's kind of hard to, when you're getting, say, 5 votes and I'm getting 1 vote, my 1 vote doesn't match up with your 5 votes very well. And who would have thought that the United States would be a Venezuela when it came to voting? The first person to call Joe Biden and congratulate him was the dictator in Venezuela. Probably to say, hey, Joe, look what my machines did for you. And we don't know. We found out in Arkansas that through forensic audit that the machines were not reliable, that they could be tampered with. We really don't know, although I believe they were tampered with and they were corruptible. Why are American votes going to Spain? It makes no sense to me.
To Spain?
And then come back. Yes, the Dominion machines, the votes went to Spain, and then they did something with the votes and sent them back to us. So that makes no sense to me. This was all part of the Dominion voting machine methodology. So, the last election left so many Republicans because there is a feeling, I would say 45% of the Republicans believe that the election was stolen, that there was corruption. We've had elections stolen in the past, but not on the magnitude that many feel this election was stolen. And you say, well, that's hard to, some people say, well, that you get the pushback, you're nuts, you're crazy, or whatnot, if you think that. But there's good forensic information out there that supports it. When Joe Biden got elected, we had an opportunity. I think the Supreme Court felt that they had already stepped up. Just leave me alone. The Supreme Court had already stepped in when the Gore-Bush election occurred. So I think the Supreme Court and Justice Roberts were not really anxious to take up this election and to get into voter fraud. But there was a way to fix it. The states retained the power. And so the breakdown in the Electoral College occurred, when we had the riots in the Capitol and all this, and they said Trump got, when you had all that, what he was trying to say to Pence was, send the electoral votes back to the states and let them figure this out, which is within the power of the vice president, because there was enough dissension in the room. If you have 40 people that say, we don't want to accept this, and they're the state delegation, then you can send it back. And that was an opportunity for our Constitution to work. But people have to make it work. Yeah. And that all one guy, and it didn't work. So, so that's kind of my 2 cents. Ask me any specific question you want to ask.
Well, about what you've just said, did you think beforehand that the Republicans would win this election?
I did.
Yeah? All right.
I did, except for the COVID factor.
Yeah.
I felt like there would be cheating and there would be other things. Could that be overcome? And it could not be.
Yeah.
But I did think the Republicans, and actually all the legitimate polls, had Trump winning by a slight margin. Yeah. So, you don't at midnight have ahead by 800,000 votes, and then at 2 o'clock in the morning you're behind by 2,000. Something's wrong in Denmark.
Thank you. I had some specific questions indeed.
Sure.
Like the news media platforms and websites and channels that you are using. Which of them do you think are the most reliable ones?
Well, all the media outlets have a tinge of bias. Okay, so if you're looking at one that is more toward the Republican side, it is going to have a tinge of bias toward the Republican side.
Yeah. If
you look at those on the other side, they're going to have bias on their side.
Yeah.
What I look at is how strong is the bias. The bias on the liberal progressive side is not just slanted, it's hostile. The bias on the Republican side is, of course, they have agenda as well. They're pushing conservatism. And, but I think the difference is Republicans understand they're pushing conservatism. And they also may have points that they agree with or disagree with. In other words, they don't take the whole thing in as fact. Republicans tend to be more free thinkers, which is interesting because I would say that has flipped. I would say if you go back 40 years ago or 50 years ago, the Democrats were the free thinkers. And that's not the case anymore. They're more into propaganda and more into, trying to spin things. And the thing is, some of the things that they try to spin are so contrary to reality that you just have to wonder, what do they think they're trying to do? They're so far removed from reality, but they're still trying to spin it and make people believe it. And then there are those that just take it and believe it. And part of the problem is we haven't educated the young Americans on American history. We seem to have kind of let that go by the sideline. It's not required anymore on college admission tests. And so that's a big factor.
All right.
You're not forced to learn it.
And can you give me one example of the twisting that you've just mentioned? A good example of the news media just twisting the facts and presenting it in a false way.
Well, I think, let's think, a perfect example was when Trump was president and they were using the dossier and repeatedly going back to this false dossier and using it and twisting it to try to say what Donald Trump, that the dossier was a factual document that could be relied on when there was sufficient facts out there to show that that dossier was basically made up and paid for by Hillary Clinton. And the other thing is they don't touch. You take Republican,
Yeah.
such as President Biden's son Hunter.
Your audio dropped for a couple of seconds.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix it.
No problem. But what did you say? Can you repeat it?
Can you hear me now?
Yes. So the last sentence about the dossier.
Yeah, I mean it was a false. It was bought and paid for by Hillary Clinton, and it was put out there to create the stir that there was Russian interference. And look, Republicans. There's certain things you have to realize about the United States, Russia, the United States, and China. Russia and the United States went through a Cold War period because of nuclear weapons. That was the basic reason for the Cold War. Two different ideologies, communism and capitalism. So you had that, but let's face the facts. In World War I and World War II, Russia and the United States were on the same side. China wasn't in World War I. They weren't in World War II. And the truth of the matter, it's not Russia that we need to be concerned about as much as it is China. And China, there are many of us that believe China has bought and paid for many politicians in the United States. I think President Biden himself is tainted and is biased in favor of China. Of course, I have to say personally that our president has never made a good political decision in his entire career. The only decisions that he's ever made were beneficial to him and not necessarily to others. So I am by no means a fan of Joe Biden. But what's interesting and what you really don't hear is if you look at Ronald Reagan and you look at Donald Trump, but now let's look at John F. Kennedy, a Democrat. They all had the same economic platform. So one's a Democrat, here's a Republican, and here's a Republican. So, it just goes to show you how far the Democratic Party has come. Because you look at John Kennedy, and most Republicans would say completely agree with his economic policy. So, that's why I say you have to understand the history of what has occurred in the past to understand what's going on in the future. And what I'm afraid of is that, people are sold by the spin. They are sold by the news spin. People really don't read papers anymore. Journalists are not as open-minded as they once were. Or if they are, they don't get hired.
Or they don't get paid enough. They
don't get paid enough, right? Or unless you're out there writing a book.
Yeah.
That may be the only way you're going to get paid if you're a conservative.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think you make a clear point about China. What do you think? What would be the reason for not wanting to write correctly about China?
Well, I think that with China, what you have is, again, so much American money has gone into China. Again, you go back to multi-capitalism. It's hard to go anywhere. It's hard to go anywhere to any store and find products, they're slim when you do, that are made in the United States. What we're seeing is so many things now are made. You can pick a few things. You can pick a few industries where the United States, is producing. But we had almost abandoned our steel industry when Trump got elected, and he resurrected it. Can you imagine a modern country not having steel production or having to rely on somebody else for steel production? What happens when you get into a war and you can't produce steel fast enough? So that's important. But, again, I said it, you have the multi-capitalists and you have the progressives that have teams seem to have lined up. And we're exporting all these jobs to China. I used to ride around in my state in Alabama, and I'd go through every little city, and I would see a local textile factory or a factory here or a factory here or a factory here. A lot of small, medium-sized factories that were producing anything from tools to shirts to clothing to you name it, they made it. Those factories don't exist anymore because all those jobs were lost.
Yeah.
And there was a mindset there, and I think it's kind of started with two Republican presidents. So again, I'm going to be very critical of two Republican presidents, George Bush Sr. and George Bush Sr. I think they were both incompetent. So you're talking to a Republican. And I'm going to sit here and tell you that we've had a bunch of bad presidents. The Bushes were not good presidents. Obama was not good president. Clinton, despite, his, sexual propensity, actually turned out to be a pretty good president because he had to work with both sides, both Democrats and Republicans. So he was actually a fairly good president. But frankly, I have to go back to Kennedy and Dwight Eisenhower to point out people that I think were very good presidents. I think Ronald Reagan did some good things. But I think we started to lose the ball with George Bush Sr. And I think it started to move toward that one world vision, that one world economy. And the thinking was that we were going to be such an advanced nation, which we're not. But we're such an advanced nation that we would be providing health care for the world, that we would be providing high-tech technology.
Yeah, so that you would benefit from it. That was what
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, and so we were going to lose these other kind of, low-hanging fruit jobs.
Yeah.
The retail, some of that stuff, but we were going to gain on the other end. Well, what happened is you take somebody like China, and China just simply steals our technology. And so then they're producing the technology that we thought we were going to have exclusive rights to because we had a bunch of stupid people that were running our country that allowed them to do it.
Yeah.
We didn't put the proper safeguards, and that was because you had Coca-Cola wanted to sell Coke in China. McDonald's wants to sell hamburgers. GE wants to make light bulbs. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on at a far cheaper price and a much larger profit margin. So it all came down to money and greed. And, really greed can be a good thing until it goes too far. And that's what, the progressives want to make it sound like it's capitalism that's evil, and yet it's the Democrats that are in bed with the multinational capitalists. And people don't get it. And so it's the big lie. It's, Republicans are all rich, and that's not true. They have some rich Republicans and they're rich Democrats. I think there are a lot more people that are richer on the Democratic side than the Republican side. But the idea of, taxing a few rich people and increasing taxes on them and increasing taxes on corporations, again, just defeats what we're trying to do and continues on that cycle where you're closing down the small independent businessman. I have a good friend that makes stained glass windows for churches. That doesn't sound like a big deal, right? And he's got a small operation, about 4 employees. The EPA, they've been doing it for 30 years. They've been breathing all this lead and everything else that that's not environmentally good for you. And the EPA came down and threatened to close them down because they needed to wear these special suits and they needed to do all that. And he's like, well, this is an artistic thing. This is not, it's kind of hard to be artistic when you're all dressed up like an astronaut. Plus, it's hot.
Yeah.
So what did he do? He ended up shipping his glass work to China.
Oh, no.
So you see how it just keeps repeating itself? The EPA regulation came, the heavy hand came down, and he says, okay, well, I can just do what everybody else is doing. I'll just have it made in China, where they don't care how much lead they're breathing.
Yeah, no. Well,
and you look at all the you look at all the stupid policies that the Democrats. I mean, we pull out of the deal with Iran, or we pull out of the deal with multiple countries, and they come back in and say, well, we don't like that. We're going to go right back in, and not only are we going to negotiate a good deal, we're just going to pay you what we were paying when we got out of it.
Yeah.
I mean, what they do makes no sense. They talk about transparency, but they're not transparent. And we're just sick and tired of being lied to. And it's gotten to the point where the lying is just, it's gone beyond just spinning things. It's gotten to the point where it's almost like Nazi Germany. The propaganda has gotten to almost that level. On the progressive and the Democrat side. If you've ever read Ayn Rand, she's an American novelist, and she talked about all this taking place, but she put it back in the 40s, and we're seeing it now. And basically, I think Atlas Shrugged was the name of the book. You might want to check it out. But she talks about all that stuff as if it was taking place in maybe the 50s. But, we're dealing with that. We're dealing with that. That concept and that notion is what we're up against.
Well, that doesn't sound good. That doesn't sound good, man.
No, it's not. And I'll tell you this, I don't know, it depends on who you're writing your paper for.
Yeah.
But if you write a pro-Republican paper in this college, you're probably not going to get you're not going to be able to defend your dissertation because they're going to hammer you.
Well, I think they'll do the same over here. Yeah.
So if you write anything that's pro-Republican, they're like, you're nuts. They're probably thinking you're going to find out why we all are mentally deficient and all we're in need of psychological counseling. That's not the case. The truth is, we can see the forest through the trees, and and people just, to be honest, even my own children who are in the workforce and successful, they really don't understand history. I don't know if it was just, it just passed over them in school, or if, they were more mathematically or science gifted, but they had no interest in history. So, that's bad. When I was in the fourth grade, my parents took me to Williamsburg, Virginia, which gave me, and then I went to Washington, D.C. And so I started to develop an appreciation of how the country developed and whatnot. And then one of my ancestors is a signatory. One of my great-great-grandfather times 3 or 4 or 5 signed the Declaration of Independence. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, so I have a direct ancestor, not half cousin or third cousin, but direct line to one of the signatories of the Declaration of Independence. And, right now in this country, you hear a lot of talk about slavery and reparation. Well, we were an English colony when that started, by the way. It wasn't the United States of America. This was a British colony that was, promoting slavery. So, the truth is our founders who wrote the Constitution did their best to try to eliminate it, but realized that in order to get a consensus of 13 colonies and to create a United States of America, they had to compromise. And frankly, those that felt real strong to abolish slavery finally said, basically reached the conclusion, that's a fight for another day. It's more important that we align ourselves as a nation against Britain, and then once we become a nation, then we'll fight that other fight.
Yeah.
Which was 100 years later, but that's what happened. The sad thing is, the Civil War probably never even needed to occur because 30 years later we had automation. We had into mass production and the introduction of the automobile and power equipment, which, if you think about,
with the benefit of hindsight,
if they could have waited 30 years, it sounds terrible. And let's not abolish slavery for 30 more years because we're going to get, machinery that can do the work. But it lasted much longer than it should have, and I think the founders of our country thought that they would have ended it long before it came to an end, truthfully. I think that was the thinking at the time, and I don't think anybody ever thought that it would come to a war. But I will tell you this, COVID has killed 500,000 people in this country. We lost 600,000 in the Civil War, both on the north and the south side. So COVID is the second largest killer of Americans next to the Civil War. We didn't even come close to World War I or World War II. So, just something to think about. And then you get also back to China, and we look at China and why they are not forthcoming about what really happened in Wuhan and the virus that got out. And once they became aware of it, why didn't they control it? And why didn't they warn the world? And my theory is this. I think that they decided to let it go. I think that China's ultimate goal is to become the leading economic country in the world, and they knew that the COVID virus would cripple the world economy. And they could come out of it on top. And that's exactly what happened. You go to a pharmacy and try to buy hand sanitizer. You go to a pharmacy and try to buy a mask. The shelves were loaded and they're all made in China.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, the majority of our pharmaceuticals in this country are actually manufactured in China. So, our clothing.
And most of the stuff, it's
yeah. Buy a fingernail clipper made in China. I mean, anything you go out and find, it's hard to find stuff that's actually made in the United States.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people that live where I live, in my area of the country. We actually try to buy American. We try to go out of our way to buy American, even if it costs more. But not everybody does that.
No.
I mean, and that's why multi-capitalists want to produce things at a lower price. And that's part of our problem. In China, they want to be the largest producer of goods and services in the world. And, they want to control the world economy. They want their dollar to be the dollar, and it wouldn't surprise me if they don't achieve it. Because the Chinese do things differently than we do. And so do the Iranians, and so does Israel. They think long term. Americans think short term. So China doesn't really think a year, 2 years, 3. They're thinking 40 years. They're thinking long term. Americans think short term. And that's a problem.
That's interesting.
Well, look, I'm not saying that China's not a bunch of bad people. China is simply ambitious, and they want to advance their country, and they're putting themselves first. Donald Trump would say that he doesn't fault the Chinese for doing what they did. We were stupid enough to let them do it. Yeah. And if you're just going to be stupid and let somebody get one up on you, and one up on everybody else, then shame on you. And, the guy, unfortunately, that's leading our country right now probably has an IQ of about 118, and, he's not the brightest cookie. He never was when he was running on all cylinders. Now he's running on 2 out of 8. So it's kind of hard to, expect a lot from this guy. He's got to have his nap time and everything else during the day. It's a sad situation. And they ignore those things that they want to ignore. They won't even go down to the border to look at things. But I think what's going to happen, sometimes, bad things happen. Like, I think Trump was doing an excellent job. And I will say this, if Trump had been reelected, I think right now we'd be an engine, firing on all cylinders, and the economy would be going really strong, coming back, because we have to come back. We have to build back. But I think that we'd be headed in the right direction. Gas would not be $3.50 a gallon. It would be probably $1.15 a gallon, because the first thing Biden did was close down the Keystone Pipeline. Then we had our other pipeline was corrupted by ransomware and all this kind of stuff. The man really lacks good common sense. And everything that he's done since he's been elected has been detrimental to this country. Now, it might be good for the Bidens, but it's been detrimental to everybody else. So I think that, we're in a really bad situation, but sometimes there's good in the bad. What I'm saying is, I think what you may see in 2 years, you may see our Congress change back to Republican. And when that happens, at least one of the houses, I think the Senate or the House of Representatives are one of them. Anyway, when that happens, then the president doesn't have the absolute power that you have if you control both houses. It's not always good for a president to have both houses. A little opposition is good, not bad. So I think that's what we're coming up on. The other thing is, if we're going to have free elections in this country, we got to get this machine thing fixed, because there's so many of us that believe the machines are corruptible, and if the machines are going to be corrupted in in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, and Arkansas, which we pretty much have proven they weren't, then we're not going to have fair elections. In Arizona, they said, we're just not going to use these machines anymore because we don't believe they're credible.
Oh, wow.
So, you have that in Arizona, but, while there's high concern levels in Michigan and Pennsylvania, they haven't gotten to that point yet. But, there's a suit ongoing and all of this, and that'll be interesting to see how that unwinds. But, I think
that. I will follow that because I didn't even know about that there were actual states that have said we're not going to use these machines anymore.
right. Arizona was the first.
Okay.
And they're really having to, struggle with it in other states. Frankly, I don't believe the two people that were elected in Georgia to the U.S. Senate were legally correctly elected. I believe that was machine tampering that led to their elections. So, I'm telling you, I think, that's Venezuela. That's not the United States.
Mm.
And then 40% of all Republicans in Georgia feel that way. They feel like the election in Georgia was stolen. It's hard to believe that Alan Perdue, who ran for U.S. Senate 6 years before and was elected, and then ran this time and got 1 million more votes, that he would lose. He got 1 million more votes than he did 6 years ago, and he lost. Now, how is that even statistically possible?
Well, I've got to wrap it up.
All right, good deal.
But, thank you for participating, for giving me all of this information.
Well, good luck. I hope you don't get fired.
Thank you. I'll be careful.
You better.
Thank you. But, thanks a lot. You were very well articulating all of your opinions and your views, and you really told me a lot, and I think it's very useful.
Good. All right. You take care.
Thank you. You too. Have a nice day. And you'll hear from me when the thesis is ready.
Oh, great. Love to see it. All right. Thank you.
Hi. Bye-bye. Say hi to Forrest.